Hello everybody, welcome to the patch 13.1b rundown for amateur play. My name is Quintic, and today I'll be using a system of predictive criteria that I've been developing to help me assess the probable impact of the patch at all levels of amateur competition. Although, do note that I'm not super sensitive to the impact of tiny changes at around Masters Plus level just now, so technically the target audience is more so Diamond under amateur competition. Okay. Please keep in mind as we're going through the changes that although each change will have an impact on raw solo queue win rate, the vast majority of small changes to individual champions should make virtually no difference to most players in IBS Gold and Platinum, since we should be drafting around comfort anyway. If you're watching this roughly a week after release, make sure to check the comments section for any updates to my predictions, because sometimes small details are overlooked, so please don't take my opinions as gospel. Use them to guide your own strategic changes from patch to patch. We'll start with Gangplank, right? With the ADC changes coming this patch, wink wink, right? There's something affecting Gangplank later. They are just trying to reduce his power overall. So, minus 5% bonus damage on crits on E. Remember, this is the bit of damage that is applied last during Gangplank's calculations. The barrels will amplify the damage of whatever triggered them, which can crit, and then if it crits, that damage is then increased by a further 5%. On top of that, Gangplank's losing some AD growth. Okay, so ordinarily, I look at Gangplank and it's okay, is this... You can classify this as a burst champion very easily, but he's also got very good sustained damage, and so, that means small amounts of damage shouldn't be affecting him. But more importantly than that, Gangplank just overkills. And so any instance of damage reduction cannot be viewed too harshly, right? We'll put a pin in him until we see the AD carry changes, and then we can kind of come back. But just immediately when you see this on a champion that does so much damage already, and he doesn't even have to just kill you with one spell, to actually get his value, you're definitely not anticipating any significant change in priority really at any level. If you can play Gangplank, you can still play Gangplank. No. Heimerdinger. So Heimerdinger support has been kind of taking over the game since Worlds, right? Why is he taking over the game? Well, one of the reasons is his turrets they feel very oppressive in the bot lane, and the counter picks that he has are not orthodox champions. They're not things that people really have a lot of experience playing, and especially when you're playing at Platinum level, where melee supports are really good at driving the game forwards above all. Heimerdinger is very good at stifling that, so he is a power pick. He's a power pick at virtually all ranks. In IBS, where everyone's pro fighting, in Platinum, where everyone's susceptible to his counter engage because he's also an offensive champion in support role. So what does he do? His turrets have lost freaking mental math on the spot. 30 to 45 HP at level 1. This is absolutely a noticeable amount of HP loss. In the early game, the reason I'm saying this, in the early game, the burst champions, whenever you see a swing of about 40 damage, that is really significant in the lane phase for their power level. It's actually one of the big changes that caused Zed to lose 3% win rate in solo queue a few patches ago. He lost 35-40 damage, something along those lines, and actually lost kill windows for it, right? So that same principle of this damage threshold does get transferred to durability very effectively. And so if Heimer's turrets are falling in HP by that exact value, we are expecting him to be less oppressive. Now, this bit right here, right? What's happening here? Minus 10 initial magic damage at all ranks. We do, I was about to say not a very big deal, but then I remembered it's okay, yes, we do now have to realize that this is technically a poke champion losing damage on their poke spell, and that's more impactful than a DPS champion losing damage on their DPS spell. Plus 10% AP, minus 10 base damage. Ultimately, even on Ryze Rush, that should mean, so you're only losing 1 damage once your Ryze is complete. It's an early game lane phase nerf. I'm just trying to envision if this actually changes pick conditions for him at all. Because the predictors say we do have to take this nerf very seriously, right? I think the best way we can draw a conclusion is through that Karma example I brought up. Does this actually give, like, Karma the means to kill a turret with just Q? No. Does it give her the means to kill turret with Q auto, where before it would have to be like Q auto auto, and she's probably taking too much damage and spending her shield, and it's a very high investment. Yeah, I don't know, very quickly this is getting close, right? Depends on how fast it scales on Heimer turrets. Ultimately, this means the picks that are good into Heimerdinger will be better into Heimerdinger. Maybe a few more counter picks open up, like other long-range champions that just become more capable of clearing out his turrets. If that is the case, then I think Heimerdinger will be a little bit devalued as a blind pick. Yeah, my prediction is that we actually probably have to revise our pick conditions for Heimerdinger just a little bit, and it should feel easier to find appropriate counter picks within pools, although champion pool limitations throughout the amateur ecosystem will probably still result in Heimerdinger being a very big problem for a lot of teams, right? Okay, Kassadin. Good lord, this champion is broken. He's broken off a combination of his recent changes that allowed his Force Pulse to kind of go ballistic, as well as Rod of Ages becoming an actually good item, as well as Seraph's Embrace being reverted, and it's just the perfect storm of Kassadin meta, right? But be careful, because this is not 4 seconds late. This is not plus 4 seconds late. This is a deceptive change. Champions with cooldown refreshes are affected differently by cooldown changes. At each time Kassadin or a nearby champion casts an ally, Force Pulse's current cooldown is reduced by 1 second. Now, this isn't as extreme as like what Ezreal gets, where he's in full control of his own cooldown, and so that ultimate buff he got a while ago in Season 12 actually went insane. Like, it was way more valuable than it looked. Like, the end result of this is that in chaotic mid-game, late-game team fights, like, you only need to see, like, +1, +2 spell casts to, like, gain your same opportunity back. It's basically just trying to slow down Kassadin's onslaughts, like, between 11 to 16, really, because, like, let's be real, he does not need the Force Pulse post-16. Okay, will 4-second E cooldown on, remember, his new first max actually affect Kassadin at lower ranks? No! The problem with, like, lower ranks is that Kassadin gets to scale. We're not good at punishing him. Platinum cannot punish him very well unless, like, they're running their full cross-map, like, giga aggro comps. Those are the conditions in which Kassadin loses in Platinum. Those aren't changing. In IBS, if Kassadin's not against, like, a direct lane bully, which he often is, the fights are messy enough that he's always given a comeback opportunity, right? In 1v1s or something, you could see him feeling it a bit. Sure, like, in the early game when he's trying to scale, he gets a little less agency, but, like, the point is, Kassadin is so systemically supported that he doesn't necessarily need the early combat power. This, because he's a champion with cooldown refreshes, won't affect him very much later, and then, like, the slightly increased period of weakness doesn't matter for, like, a lot of lower levels in amateur play. Like, at the end of the day, this kind of looks like it's one of those nerfs that's, like, from tier 0 to tier 1 sort of thing. Kassadin just has too much going for him for, like, a slightly weaker duel potential before he's fully online to really matter, in my opinion. Okay, Kindred. We have an easy predictor for this one, right? Guys, this is a DPS champion. Is this Kindred's primary damage ability? No, not even. It's Kindred's primary clear ability, right? The only time where, like, -10 damage overall on Q matters is when you're clearing your jungle. But we've established through our levels of play study that, like, the clear speed is only a relevant factor in Diamond Plus, right? So Kindred pick conditions don't change whatsoever. Kindred power should not change really whatsoever. It's more so that Kindred early game is a little bit slower, which opens up potentially a few new invades, which will not be capitalized on in, like, Platinum below. It might be capitalized on in Diamond up. Expected very, very minimal impact, and the people for whom this does impact are good enough at the game to path around the potential weakness that, like, this will offer. But, like, realistically, it's negligible. Right. Lillia! Yeah, this is interesting. They're increasing all of Lillia's AP ratios. The reason they're doing this is if you've looked up any of Lillia's stats lately, she has one viable build. It's Demonic Tank. Lillia feels very, very incapable of actually benefiting from an AP build right now. Plus 10% ratio overall on Q, plus 15% ratio on E, minus 2 seconds on E. So I'm just gonna say this: if you buy a Liandry's, this is plus 8 damage per Q. That is the kind of DPS change that like it's ultimately making almost no difference, right? And then this would be on that Liandry spike, plus 12, right? Yeah, plus 12 on E. So what's that? Plus 20 damage in like one rotation. This is the one part that's like probably going to make the most impact. Plus 3% max health, or plus 0.3% max health per 100 AP of target's maximum health. So she's getting, so it doesn't really matter whether she's building Liandry's or Demonic first. I mean, Ryze would increase it by like 10, but she's gaining roughly 82 AP from her first item. 0.984, and then post buff, it would be 1.23% max HP per second. Hi, it's Editing Quinn. For some reason, I got math wrong, and I just decided that this means it's an increase of, like, 1% max health damage per second on her first item spike. That's blatantly untrue. This is actually very clear where, like, it's almost the plus 0.3% max health damage per second on first item, and ultimately that is, like, a nice damage increase, but not very significant. It's just a small DPS boost that's not enough to say, like, wow, this champion is so much stronger than before, we have to start picking her. So because I did the math wrong, I got to a lot of incorrect conclusions during the stream. I said this was the only really significant buff, but not only is it not nearly as significant as I thought, it's also fully offset by the upcoming demonic nerfs that have to be talked about. So I said, like, maybe top lane Lillia would be the big winner, but really this opens up no pick conditions for anybody. The only time, like, the passive buff actually matters is when you get on, like, 2-3 items and your DPS actually does start going up quite a lot. And I don't think anywhere like Platinum and below for Lillia Jungle is going to actually give her the opportunity to scale into that. Maybe if you have like a good top lane counterpick matchup, you might find some windows, but, you know, I'm not feeling any substantial difference in Lillia power that isn't just picking off Platinum players with an easier, like, pick attempt on her E, right? Lucian and Nami are overtaking the pro scene, which means we need to address them. Lucian, as is, doesn't fare too well in the hands of non-elite players. We're reducing his lane bullying potential. This is all mana! Okay, so I've been getting into arguments with people on TikTok lately about how much mana is necessary to play out a sequence. So even though we don't have predictors, we can use the knowledge that we have to kind of try to figure out how this would impact Lucian. You only need enough mana to play out your sequence. What does that mean exactly? A sequence is the period between recalls. A positive sequence is you exit base, you play out your lane or your mid game, you achieve some form of tangible advantage, you recall. That's a good sequence, right? Mana is only constraining if you would run before your sequence would be completed, right? So Lucian losing 30 mana at level 1, immediately being offsets by some growth. This locks him out of just over half a Q, so he would lose like 1 Q, 1 W. The growth catches up at level 6. No, because this is not linear. That's the problem with growth statistics in League of Legends. They are not linear. Yeah, look, we've spent way too long talking about Lucian, like going back and forth, bringing up stuff. It's like, oh, how do I assess a mana buff? Like, how do we do this? Originally, I thought like maybe this actually impacts his ability to play out an early game sequence, but then it's also brought up that like, okay, yeah, he can opt into Doran's Ring again. He can opt into like, or he can just like play out like slower lane phases as he has been doing lately, play for the mid game where he actually spikes. Like maybe this doesn't actually change his capacity to lane whatsoever, even though it's half of any random basic ability. Ultimately, there's so much at play in the system here, like AD carry changes, meaning people might be going overheal more often, where Lucian might be bound to presence of mind, while overheal also impacts him negatively. There's also the possibility of going Quickblades second item, which just might make him like really strong again, right? Like there's so much at play here. that this is not an isolated change. And so there's no point in, like, talking about just this. There is literally no way to predict the impact of this change in the context of all of that. We have to get practical experience and see, like, Lucian will lose pick conditions if the Nami buffs are dramatic, the systems stop favoring him as much, and, like, he actually finds himself awkwardly playing out some sequences. But, like, I'm not able to predict that. This is, like, the probably #1 thing we're going to have to test on the patch to actually draw a conclusion. I mean, if he is still just farming, like, predominantly with auto attacks and not really trading until he has, like, his big spikes, this is an absolutely nothing nerf. Okay, on to Maokai. Maokai is getting a partial revert of his Q bonus damage to monsters. And Maokai is also, what's he losing here? 1% bonus HP and 5% AP on Sapling Toss. Going, like, on the empowered one, it's 2% bonus, 10%. So it's, yeah, it's just, because this is double the damage, right? Yeah, it's nowadays double the damage. Gotcha. Okay, so let's be clear. Maokai is, like, absolutely fucking broken. Do you guys remember that period in which it was like Worlds 2022? Maokai was, like, really prominent going into the tournament and then just abruptly fell off and disappeared. Well, he was still absolutely terrorizing amateur play during that time, even though the Worlds players had kind of moved on from him and decided that he wasn't quite as strong as we thought at that period. Maokai, in current state, just regularly dumpsters lower elos a lot more consistently. I mean, he is just so stable, so consistent, so flexible. You can fit him into virtually any archetype because he can be your primary peel. He can poke, like, he can be in siege comps. He, as the siege or the disengage, right? He can be in any team fight. He can be in, like, a lot of controls because he's so defensive. And that flexibility to take fights in a bunch of different ways is really valuable at levels of play where people are making a lot more mistakes. So what do we see? We see a clear speed nerf, which we know negligibly affects Platinum and below. Saplings are probably the really oppressive part about him right now in, like, demonic builds. Demonic, like, Liandry's has been stomping solo queue. People have been going red smite on Maokai. Like, if somebody's building red smite, that's an unusual circumstance, all right? So we have, like, what is effectively a small poke damage nerf. Now, poke damage impacts champions at small values. Yes, it really does. So it is a little, so although we were able to say it looks like a small damage change, and it would be if he was pure DPS, it does matter a little bit in terms of, like, the traps. The traps become less oppressive. But, like, do most variants of Maokai need to rely fully on those traps, or is the chip damage just kind of a bonus to his output? It's a bonus. So ultimately, I would predict, you know, with how absolutely giga broken he was before, Platinum and below, this should make a negligible difference for the Maokai players. Really, the Demonic Embrace change would be more likely to impact his power, and then even if it does, you can still Lucidity Boot Rush into Radiant Virtue and, like, be fine in a different role. Like, the champion is flexible enough that you just can change what you're doing and adapt if you are a Maokai player. If you're a Maokai abuser and you only want to play Maokai because he's broken, maybe you don't list him as highly in the list of priorities. But again, he's kind of, like, along the lines of Seraphine, like, these utility champions that just really regularly stomp IBS Platinum, like, levels like that. So I'm not expecting a lot of change. Nami. What did Nami get? Nami got -5 damage all ranks E, -10 damage W. Okay, that sounds negligible, but we are going to look at Nami under the lens of a burst champion. Remember, this hits 3 times. This is -15 damage. This is -10, right? We have a difference of 25 damage. Now, usually on a burst champion, like, our general criteria is, like, if it's 35-40, we start to really say, wow, that's a big difference. I don't think the Nami Lucian lanes are, like, giga overkilling everybody unless it's specifically a culling kill. This Nami change is going to be a test to see if our predictors have the right values, because 25 is under our value for the early to mid game. we think it's valuable. We think it's like impactful, but it's still likely to be impactful. That said, if you are picking Nami because like Janna's not in pool, because Lulu's not in pool, because you actually value her disengage and stuff like that, and you're not picking her as like the raw lane bully that she's like kind of designed to be, you are picking her for her defensive utility and you're good at that part of Nami. Like if you were picking Nami without the context of Lucian in your games, she's going to be completely fine. There's going to be like virtually no relevant change for you. It's only the Nami Lucian players where I look at that and I say, like, that's actually meaningful burst, and they're not overkilling, so. Orianna. So, Clockwork Windup. It is now a level... the damage is unchanged, but it now scales from levels 1 to 18. Now, the funny thing about this is this kind of looks like it marginally decreases in power at certain levels. Right? 147... Well, because it now scales to level 18, so, like, there's going to be a period at, like, 16 where you're actually weaker, no? Like, that's probably, like, so negligible we don't even need to talk about it, but it's just kind of funny to notice. The ball deals 100% damage to the first target hit, and damage afterwards is reduced by 10% per enemy hit. It's now just 70% all enemies hit after the first. So this means the literal second and third target are actually taking less damage, but everyone after that is taking more. Technically, that is like a wave clear buff. That's like doing virtually nothing in a team fight. But to my knowledge, her wave clear was already kind of fine, no? Dissonance is going down by 20 mana at rank 5. Actually kind of a big deal because this is so absurdly overpriced. And Shockwave base damage is going up by 50, 75, 100, plus 10% AP. That one's actually kind of big in terms of like raw damage output, especially in a game state in which like genuine burst mages are like a little unhappy against their direct counterparts because Lifeline is running rampant in the game. Now, this is going to sound stupid, but when I look at these changes, I genuinely think Orianna support buffs immediately. I look at this and I think like, wow, one of the big limiting factors to Orianna's utility was just how expensive this was and how difficult it was to play out a sequence. And now we're getting extra base damage and like we're doing more damage with less AP too. Like the utility is more impactful. Like, wow, that's... So Enchanter Orianna is like kind of a funny niche thing that I think has been pretty weak for a while, but like I might re-explore it after this change. Maybe not for competitive viability, although I think there's more to it than people think, given the resistances on E as well. If nothing else, this is a burst champion who just received 50 damage at rank 1, actually. No, that's big. That's really, really, really big. Orianna at level 6 just received 50 damage. TLDR, kind of funny, very low impact. Might unlock some more wave clear break points, potentially, and that could be power impacting, like really power impacting in P+. This is an Orianna support buff. This, you would kind of look at it from the context at first of saying, like, oh, is that... Like, that's kind of nice, we just get some more damage. And then you, like, really zero in on the rank 1 plus 50 and think, oh, that's actually a really, really, really big deal for early game lethal windows. Ryze. With 13 ones, yeah, whatever. So, Ryze loses some durability and loses some maximum mana. Okay, so here is how Ryze's durability changes throughout the game. Ryze at level 1 is losing, what, 25 durability? If you go all the way up to level 18, Ryze is losing like 130 effective HP. At level 11, where it's like more likely to come into play, what is that, 70? Yeah, that's 70 effective HP. Ultimately, we're going to kind of look at that and say, like, it matters, like, a little bit, but not enough to change pick conditions, right? It matters in the case that Ryze is getting pelted with magic damage and can't fight back, because he's range limited. And now, as for this, increased maximum mana. I wonder if this actually hits a recursive point on Seraphs. If this hits a recursive point on Seraphs, it's actually indirectly nerfing his AP as well. It is hitting Ryze's size of a lifeline shield. It is hitting his durability further. This actually might be a double dip nerf on durability that like impacts his ability to do all the things he likes to do while also potentially limiting the sequences he can take by having less access to mana. So like the 75 HP nerf at like level 11, 13 against magic is far more than it seems. It's probably hitting his AP off Seraph's Recursion, if that's an interaction. And so we probably see a meaningfully weaker Ryze. That means, well, I would assume he is so systemically supported that if you are playing Ryze right now, you probably do continue to have good Ryze conditions, but like, the way that pro players were B1ing Ryze, I think probably P- should not be doing that and should probably be looking for like really consistent kill targets in the mid lane with just like mid jungle 2v2 off Ryze, right? Instead of just blind picking him, especially since like you blind pick him on live, he does have some bad matchups. He can kind of endure them just by playing them off, playing the wave, but like, I don't know, it's impacting everything. It's impacting everything. Udyr is losing 1% bonus physical damage per 100 bonus AD. He is then gaining up to 10% attack speed. I have not played Prowler's Udyr though. This is the second direct nerf to Prowler's Udyr, which is definitely the most volatile and most solo queue-esque build, which also means that it's still quite good in IBS, which also means that it's still good in, like reasonably good in, like, Platinum and stuff. But that build is definitely hitting, like, funny tier when you start to get to, like, Diamond Masters, to my knowledge. This offset means that, like, any non-funny AD Udyr build doesn't care and is not impacted whatsoever, and you're still going to find, like, you're probably going to find more value out of it, truthfully, like the Trinity or the Bork builds. And to clarify, Bork is only in conditions where they're moving straight into you, and you don't have to go on the offensive. This one is more significant than it seems. This is effectively minus 40 over the course of its duration, right? Wingborn Storm, minus 40. Now it is a DPS champion, so that means he would be impacted like a little less than a burst champion, and he's losing some demonic damage. But he's also, like, hilariously broken right now. Okay, here's what I'll end up saying about Udyr. If Prowler's Udyr, like, Prowler's Udyr is still killing you, but the last nerf stopped him from over-killing you. There is a non-zero chance that Prowler's Udyr, I wouldn't know from experience, is just killing you, and therefore this nerf would matter for that build. However, the Trinity bear builds are completely unaffected. The Phoenix builds would only really be brought down further by Demonic, but I genuinely think that Udyr is, like, durable enough and his play pattern is, like, power farm heavy enough. He's getting the resources to play out the long fights that he wants. I genuinely think that, like, any non-Prowler's build is, like, virtually unaffected in terms of its pick conditions, no matter what level of play you're at, no matter how you're playing him. The Udyr players are going to keep playing Udyr, and they will still be very satisfied with the champion that they're playing, even though it's minus 40 damage. Like, I have the feeling, based on the type of champion he is, that can't matter. Okay, everybody has sent me this one. I've received so many DMs about Yuumi. Oh my god. Okay. First of all, I was right last patch. 50 damage off a poke spell is damning. Now Yuumi survived, even though I said that might be the end of her. Why did she survive? Because she went straight back to her utility builds, and they were in a good spot. But poke Yuumi, if you check pro builds, like if you look at the esports wiki and you see like what the Yuumis in pro play have been building still, none of them have stuck with poke. Minus 75 attack range, minus 6 base AD, minus 50 base health, minus 2 base regen. Okay, why is this ridiculous? Because one of Yuumi's greatest strengths is the ability to hop out early game, fist fight you to like 2 HP, and then just attach, chug her potions, never take damage anymore, right? Yuumi could trade entire health bars down and then win the lane off of it. That strength is now heavily gimped, because minus 50, minus 6, minus 75 means that it's way harder for her to actually have an impact while hopping off. Okay, she's getting 450 total range, which is Morgana range, by the way, which is not good for one auto only, and then she's less than that. Oh god. Plus the shield is being decreased in value, which is being compounded by her heal shield itemization. The ratio on W is halved, which was another one of her, like, big big strengths, right? Like, when Veigar was in a bit of a better state, I would hop on a Veigar and he's like plus 100 AP, and then I'm plus 60 AP, and then like, and now the AP ratio off of Yuumi's movement speed is gone, so it's a flat 20, which on a like, what is it, 10-second cooldown? That's terrible! Okay, so Yuumi has so many strengths, and they have now hit all of them, right? Heal uptime is poor off her first set of nerfs in this like whole sequence. Then they hit the Q, then they hit the fist fighting, then they hit the shield, then they hit the secret aura stats, right? So all she realistically has left is the summoner spell advantage. Yeah, so Yuumi is basically being removed from the game before the rework. Now, please, God, IBS players, you should not have been picking Yuumi before this. So don't pick her now. Yeah, no, Yuumi should be probably removed from all levels of play off this. This is a lot. This is hitting literally every aspect of her output. This is tremendous. This is ridiculous. What does that mean for the greater game around her? Sivir becomes harder to pick by a lot, because the best Sivir pick conditions were like, you FP Yuumi, the enemy takes Zeri, you get Sivir. So she does actually affect AD carry pick conditions around her a little bit, which does mean that if Yuumi was a core piece of your pool in amateur play, you are going to have to find something to replace her. You can't just go -1 champion in your pool when amateur players should be playing out like with a champion pool exactly large enough to not get completely screwed over in the ban phase. Right? Zoe is getting some damage changes, but I'm talking about these several hours after the rest of the patch notes, just because I think I have some more insightful things to say the second time around on reflecting. So for a bit of a history lesson first, Zoe is kind of like Vex in a way. Like, they're both very pure burst champions who both like quickly lose a lot of value when they can't 100 to 0 somebody. In Vex's case, it's because she's too committal. In Zoe's case, it's more so that her matchups in the mid lane become very, very dangerous when she can't like meaningfully threaten them back. She does just become like a very exposed champion. And that's why historically you've seen Zoe blind pick like very frequently, and now you don't see her at all. What does she offer? She offers damage that's not enough to protect herself from other mages. She offers, like, negligible wave clear. On top of all of that, the systems in the game right now don't favor her very well. You know, very durable fighters. Post-durability update, she never really got much compensation, as the notes say right here. Extra lifelines in the game now that her direct lane opponent is very, very likely to pick that up. So yeah, Zoe is struggling a bit on damage. The only time she doesn't really struggle a bit on damage is in support role when she has somebody to actually help her out. And the reason she thrives there and Vex does not is because Zoe's utility is actually a lot more consistent and controllable. Right? And then she's also given the opportunity to run Hex Flash for more damage, and it's just kind of funny like that. So the compensation that Zoe's getting for, like, that collection of problems is actually pretty significant. Sleepy Trouble Bubble is reducing magic resist by a percentage for only 1 hit. So, like, that does mean it's only going to be Zoe's Q that benefits, or if your allies screw up and wake somebody up, it's their, like, non-magic damage, like, physical auto attack, which could kind of suck. But ultimately, this kind of, like, is a watch list change. It's one where it's a burst champion, a pure burst champion, receiving non-negligible amounts of damage, and the only reason this wouldn't, like, really help Zoe in the solo lane is if it's not quite enough damage to protect her from her dangerous matchups still. Support Zoe is getting a lot of power here, for the record. Just, this is even further utility, which can benefit another carry. Do not learn Support Zoe in amateur play for the sake of playing something that might be strong, though. You need to invest a lot of time. You have to genuinely enjoy this style of mage support, and you have to genuinely, like, be ready to learn the mechanics, or it's just a complete waste of your time. So basically, I do think that, like, because of the style of champion that Zoe is, this is, like, a very significant buff. It just might not be quite enough for mid lane immediately, although it's worth noting that if she does get, like, a slight snowball and her burst is significant, then she actually gets to stop fully killing her opponents later, because just she has a huge warp factor that, like, really performs well in Platinum, where she, like, changes how you have to interact with walls. She makes it a lot more dangerous. And on top of that, just chunking somebody out to like 1 HP from over a wall and forcing them to recall is in a lot of cases just as good as getting a kill. You just have to have the resources and be fed enough to get to that point. Okay, so we actually do need to read the context of this one so we can get a greater feel for like what they're trying to do here. Adjustments this patch that should help reduce some of the current frustration with fighters, the high levels of sustain, and ability haste that the class has access to. To tackle ability haste or separating it from most defensive items, a fighter will need to pick between haste and durability. Okay. Delaying power into third item. As far as Omnivamp goes, we want to curb stacking sources to slow down snowballing. So some of the weak ones will get worse. Okay. Eclipse is losing its Omnivamp and gaining haste. The shield is becoming more accessible, and it is now a Serrated Dirk Caulfield's Warhammer item. No sustain on Eclipse. Okay. If you are a core Eclipse user, you will probably not be significantly affected by this because the greater ability to trade with your shield should offset the loss of the Omnivamp. The ranged users in particular should actually be very happy with this. This harms Aatrox further. He actually does value the Omnivamp quite a bit. I would not be surprised if there were only like 2-3 champions that got like noticeably harmed by this and the rest of the core users liked this, and then like anyone who isn't a core user kind of like stays away a bit, you know? Goredrinker, 7 ability haste, now 50 health plus 3 ability haste. Oh, that's bad for Riven. That's really bad for Riven. That's my first thought. It kind of seems like Goredrinker's ability or mythic passive now just does 2 things poorly. Ravenous Hydra is now no longer Omnivamp. It has more haste, and the cleave damage now triggers lifesteal. Okay. It is healing you noticeably less if you're not an auto attacker. If you're an auto attacker, you get more haste, and it's nice. If you're not an auto attacker, you're healing for less. Other than that, like, the item is still, in its current state, just a big stat stick. Although, because it's not outright broken, because it's received its, like, set of nerfs, the only thing it's really good for is, like, having the most AD on one item, plus, like, a bit of sustain, right? So now you also have to compare it back to Black Cleaver if you're just a generalist user who is like, oh, Hydra's strong, I'll build Hydra. Maw actually gains more lifesteal on Lifeline. It's a little odd. Just lifesteal on lifesteal on Lifeline actually makes this quite a bit weaker. But it's plus 10 AD on a defensive item with no haste. Ugh. Yeah, we talked about this one for such a long time that I got literally no usable footage out of it because I kept going back and forth on my opinions. Just here, there, ooh, there, whoop, wow. Basically, though, Maw of Malmortius losing ability haste and losing, like, a genuinely powerful Omnivamp effect, which I continuously underrated, definitely makes the completed item quite a lot less appealing, and you would only need to finish it for, like, the substantial increase in shield power. So it's probably going to end up feeling really bad as second item, which might open the pick conditions for more magical top laners. Because, like, it's far less of a one-stop shop, and now it's also competing with Force of Nature, because, like, you would probably rather purchase this, like, around 3rd or 4th, when a lot of bruisers should be curving more into their actual durability options. So, I mean, unless you're just buying a Hex Drinker early and sitting on it, or unless you're like a champion that needs massive amounts of raw AD, so this ends up being your best in slot defensive option, we're probably seeing like a little less Maw these days. Right? They're trying to make all of these better at doing damage. So the first conclusion I will draw is that build this! Why are they buffing this one? Why are they buffing this item? That's the first conclusion I will draw, okay? Black Cleaver is a really overwhelming stat stick on way more champions than you would think. Like, literally anybody capable of outputting multiple instances of physical damage should just, like, at this and go, like, I want this immediately. You are getting 400, oh, hold on. Let's go to everything, right? You're getting 400 health, 50 AD, 30 haste. That's so much haste on one item, right? You're getting the, like, Rage passive, which isn't, like, a big deal, but, you know, 18 flat movement speed on top of everything else, kind of nice. You're getting just, like, 5% armor reduction every time you hit them if you have backloaded damage patterns. Like, goddamn, that's kind of excellent, right? Black Cleaver Rush has been a thing, right? Black Cleaver Rush ADC will not be a thing. No, chat, no. A lot of defensive items have just lost all their haste. So this item that was already good, that has like the most haste that you can get, is all of a sudden like really skyrocketing in value. In terms of the actual items that got hit, like, people are still going to be building DD even though the Defy healing is a little lower, just because it is valuable to have that, like, bleed over time, especially now that it's doing, like, some more damage, giving you some more resistances. Like, we're not going to really change our Death Stance pick conditions very much, right? Overall predictions on how this would affect, like, top lane meta as a whole. Casters lose a lot of value from Ravenous. Casters lose a lot of value from Maw. Death Stance value is decreased, but not substantially so. Cleaver value is just increased. So honestly, it is just, like, certain types of caster bruisers that are the big losers. Certain types of juggernauts are disproportionately, like, empowered by this Black Cleaver. We're really expecting, like, no dramatic changes, especially at low levels where the bruisers snowball like crazy. It's just maybe champions like Aatrox are getting hits while they're down a little bit. So, Grievous Wounds. Okay. There's some interesting stuff happening in the Grievous Wounds section. Every Grievous Wounds item is getting changed, and we're getting to 40% Grievous baseline. So that is really, really, really huge for the components. 40% on Orb, 40% on Executioners, 40% on Bramble, and the magic damage reflected is a little bit better, so it's not completely useless for this purpose anymore. But we still don't really consider that. Looking at the actual items, Putrifier is now a Forbidden Idol item with a bigger combined cost, which can feel a little bit bad. It is noticeably less AP, noticeably less haste, plus 8% heal shield power, and also you can't give your allies Grievous Wounds, you have to do the damage. Okay, this item sucks. Look, can you truthfully say that having 8% heal shield when its competitors are like the 16% Mikhail's Redemption? Like, can you really say that's a compelling reason to opt into this? It's really just, who is hitting opponents? You have to be a poke enchanter. And at that point, just put it on your mage with actual income, because Oblivion Orb doesn't suck anymore, right? Morellonomicon, it loses 100 health, but it now has 10 magic penetration. So yeah, the value of upgrading this, like, when you need to is okay, but like that as a damage item, this is obviously never competing with Shadow Flame. It is never competing with Rabadons. It is never competing with Void. Truthfully, yeah, just sit on the orb whenever you need it as a magic damage champion, and you will not be seeing these completed until like the end of the game. And when you do see them completed, I mean, like, you're buying this for a haste stick, but it's a bad haste stick. Wow, Morello's is better in most cases. That's unreal. Yay! Supports are released from Grievous jail. Hooray! Okay, Chainsword, this isn't its actual value. They copied the attack damage down, but it's a worse stat stick, so if you're building it solely for the stat stick after it's already received a stat stick nerfs, stop it. Mortal Reminder is interesting. So the coolest thing about this change is Senna actually swaps from Chainsword to Mortal now. Attack speed is gone, but Armor Pen is up to 30%! This one is compelling. This one is a compelling option. It's going to be less damage than LDR, of course, but it's an option that you're actually allowed to finish and then curve into other items. It's a way to hybridize your pen and your executioners well. Garen no longer has Mortal. Oh my god, Garen has no Zeal options. So Mortal Reminder so far is like the only option that looks compelling to finish like at any reasonable on-curve time, right? Lord Doms is getting a funny buff just for fun. We've already talked about Bramble. Thornmail, we're upping its damage, even though Thornmail's damage is already quite excellent, and it's already, like, one of the better armor options, right? And now you can't apply your Grievous on CC anymore. You have to take a hit. So the most consistent way to apply anti-heal now will just be sitting on Oblivion Orb, or it will be having somebody who likes to build Mortal Reminder. Those are the more consistent ways. The Bramble buff is, like, moderately impactful. It's not going back up to its, like, disgusting you die immediately sort of status, but it's okay. It's decent. Thornmail is, like, yeah, exclusively versus auto attackers, but it's way better at its job. There are 2 completed mythics that we care about, or 2 completed legendaries, rather, that we care about. Needless to say, the consequence of Oblivion Orb becoming a much stronger item as a whole for anti-heal purposes will be nerfs to Soraka, Sona, more to Yuumi, more to Aatrox, some to Swain. Like, just any of these very core healers are going to be impacted by just easier means to purchase Grievous. We now have to talk about the AD carry class adjustments, which then we'll be able to come back and talk about Mortal more particularly, right? More specifically. Changes will add power to ADCs overall. I watched Freak's video about his intentions with these changes. He was just trying to make AD carry players feel like they have more agency without introducing too much power into them. So let's talk about this. Infinity Edge and Quickblades can now be built on your second item. There's a few weird points that have been brought up off of this. The first one is Gangplank being allowed to skip one of his extra crit cloaks to go IE second, as he would anyway. So given that he already would do that, he's just getting it 800 gold cheaper. I don't see any genuine... I don't anticipate like a humongous change in Gangplank's power, but they're pre-nerfing him, and we'll keep him on a watch list, obviously. Quickblades users gain greater access to their item, and that is actually meaningfully power impacting, especially since we're going to see a lot of champions gaining more mana, right? Infinity Edge is power impacting to get second item, that is true, but remember that you are critting less frequently. That being said, Infinity Edge first item historically was a thing, and like you just gained so much access to just big chunks of damage, right? So yeah, any champion that is purely AD reliant, like, or champions that have steroids in their kits, right? Tristana, Draven, Samira, champions like this are going to be noticeably stronger by being allowed to build Infinity Edge second. Aphelios too, actually. Aphelios also gets a lot of value from that. Champions who are more dependent on attack speed will scale slower still, like, because having Mythic plus IE second is, like, awkward because you do actually like and value the PD in a lot of cases. I think we're going to kind of see almost a return to some Season 6 strategies. So my expectation is we will see a lot of attack speed carries, building Mythic, Zeal, Infinity Edge. The theme of Season 13 to me is components. We are seeing a lot more value in tank itemization, now in bruiser itemization with potentially just Maw, now with Grievous Wounds. We're seeing time and time again, they're trying to make us think about the value of components and sitting on them. The Zeal is there because an attack speed carry curving straight into physical damage is a little uncomfortable at times. Like, remember the old school way of building IE first item, which was BF Sword, Zeal, Infinity Edge. Remember that one? Just to give you, like, all of the stats you kind of wanted by the time your big spike comes online. So I think, like, Xayah, Jinx, arguably maybe Neela, definitely, no, but Twitch is Bork. I was going to say Twitch. We'll find, like, attack speed champions like that who, like, would definitely value the Infinity Edge, but they're probably going to be stronger by taking that 1,000 gold detour into Zeal and just spiking a little bit later than some of their raw physical counterparts, but then still coming online earlier, right? Essence Reaver and Navori Ezreal is going to be fun. Yes, Ezreal doesn't have to opt into Kraken anymore, which was, like, okay for him, but it was still awkward. Some people have brought up Yasuo Yone IE Rush. I think that sounds appalling. I think their attack speed, like, shield bow is way too valuable. I don't think Zerker Rush into IE is probably going to be strong enough for them. Especially Yasuo, who needs the extra survivability from shield bow. I wouldn't be concerned about that, although you never know. Sometimes things just do too much damage, so who knows. Bloodthirster, it's losing some lifesteal, but the shield is going up noticeably, and it's cheaper to buy. You will still lose damage for building this inappropriately. It makes Aphelios way stronger once he's allowed to get it, right? It will feel bad as a second item nowadays, even though it used to be, like, pretty okay. Basically, Aphelios is the best pick condition for this item, like, where you just kind of go, like, Mythic IE BT in anti-engage games. I do not think in the context of like competitive play that you should just look at this, say, I have an option that I can build when my teammates can't peel me, and then draft no peel for yourself, just assuming you can build Bloodthirster, because then you are noticeably gimping your damage for no gain. The option of Bloodthirster early is here for a solo queue context, not a competitive context. That being said, the fatter shield is going to be horrifying at late levels. Granted, that's at level 18, and when is your AD carry getting to level 18? Like, it's just a better anti-engage item for endgame, and it is a better psychosis engage option for mid-game, I guess. It's just the infinity, like really, when Infinity Edge is a second item, it's really crowding this out early, right? We have a ton of mana growth changes. I am not going to assess the impact of these, although Jhin has a cost one here. Okay, Jinx is one that could actually be, like, a little bit scary. I am not going to try to assess the impact of these too much. Ricochet cost. Predominantly because everybody is getting it. They're trying to unbind AD carries from Presence of Mind. It is on our watch list to check if they succeeded. If they didn't, everyone can simply fight in lane a little more, right? And then we also have to so we also have to consider Bork. What's happening here? The actual active damage is lower, the ranged on-hit damage is up. Now, this is a percent current health on hits, which we assessed Lillia's of 1% max health per second to be reasonable DPS, right? If we assessed Lillia's like that, then we would then have to say that Blade of the Ruined King is also quite a bit stronger for ranged users in terms of DPS. This siphon damage change, I mean, truthfully, it is like eventually a 50 damage burst change, but at a point in the game in which 50 damage bursts can't really matter too much. So like ultimately you're a little concerned about the cooldown if you're like Irelia specifically. And it still feels weird to me who can like looks at DPS changes and says like that's not really that huge to kind of look at this and say, well, maybe it is, because like 1% max health DPS is actually a very significant change now that I think about it. I know it's current. I know it's current. But that said, this is absolutely not significant enough to create Bork conditions on champions who did not have them before. It's like an Ashe thing, it's a Twitch thing. Maybe we look at on-hit Varus again a little bit, because like it's not absurd to think that Ginsu's with the current state of Blight is appealing. Maybe we look at this again, but yeah, I don't know. Demonic Embrace. Now, as we said, 1% max health damage in DPS is kind of big. 0.2% max health in DPS kind of isn't. If you're losing 0.8% max health over 4 seconds, truthfully, because the DPS change is so negligible and like the only time it looks appealing is if you look at the whole 4 seconds, I'm not really anticipating that Demonic Embrace is going to be like much weaker, and therefore all the nerfs to the champions who are using it above make a lot more sense. Essence Reaver is currently letting down the champions that want to build it the most, so we're upping its power to be a bit more in line with other itemization options. Okay, it's an Ezreal item and he's gaining a little more AD and he's happy with that. Cool. It's a Draven item, and he's gaining more AD, and he's very happy with that, okay? He's very happy with that. The historical Essence Reaver users who used it for mana aren't switching back to it. There's more compelling options, like that's his Sivir Xayah. Guys, if you're not able to build Essence Reaver, like, early into the game, you're not gaining Essence Reaver value. Because by the time, like, okay, let's imagine. It's like, okay, we've gotten our Mythic, we've gotten our IE. Now what? Well, I probably have to build, like, LDR, or I probably have to build PD. Maybe I have to build Mortal in this condition. So I can get my pen, I can get my attack speed. And then eventually I'm going to need, like, GA, I might need a Bloodthirster. Like, I might need my defensive options here. So, like, you just hit this awkward point where it's like... And all the mana changes as well, which is reducing the need to have its passive. Who wants this third with the other options in the game? The only situation in which you'll find this third is if, like, You are a very specific Sheen user who is against like a million squishies and you have no need for attack speed, and that doesn't create more champions who would want it. Like, arguably Neela has a condition for this now, I guess, if you're like against a lot of squishies. No, there's a Chemtech Drake buff that doesn't change our prioritization of Drakes. It just gives us more heal shield power per stack, and like that's potentially powerful when its value increases, right? But overall, that's the patch. A lot of big systemic changes that will impact champion power level. And for the sake of amateur play, that means assessing your own pools to just make sure that you can still play them. Like, most of the champions that you will be playing already, you can probably still pilot, and you're just going to need to adapt to it. And I would not recommend going for, like, crazy pool shakeups off this. It's more so, like, is there something here that you used to play that is now noticeably better by, like, noticeably improved by AD carry changes, noticeably improved by, like, Cleaver, noticeably improved by direct changes here. It's more stuff like that, because, like, barring a couple of fighters, I don't think anything got nerfed to oblivion, and barring Yuumi. Like, Yuumi has to leave your pool. But ultimately, yeah, I think that will be the expected impact on amateur play.